All right, well, it looks like a great turnout. Thanks for coming. We'll get this kicked off, and I'm going to turn the mic over to our director, Jeb Williams.
Thank you, Casey. Wow, like Casey said, what a great turnout. Super appreciative of everybody taking the time out of your evening to be here, talk about a really important topic that obviously is at the core mission of the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. So how tonight's going to work, we've received an enormous amount of input, questions, comments from people that have registered for this. And so we're very appreciative of the panelists that have agreed to be on the panels, obviously the presentations that are going to be moving forward with where we're at status-wise, those types of things. But so we have put a lot of the comments, the questions together that are going to be asked of the panelists, and we're really hopeful too that we're going to be able to have some time for those that maybe didn't submit any questions in here tonight as well. But we're also going to be here afterwards to make sure to be here and visiting and doing the things that we feel are so important. So first of all, on behalf of the North Dakota Game and Fish Department, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the North Dakota Habitat and Hunting Access Summit. We're here today because hunting isn't just a tradition in North Dakota, it's a way of life. It connects us to the land, to each other, and to the future of wildlife conservation. This summit is a unique opportunity for all of us, hunters, landowners, conservationists, legislators, to come together, share perspectives, and find solutions that ensure hunting access and opportunities remain strong for generations to come. Our goals are pretty clear: to strengthen relationships, bring broader awareness to wildlife habitat and hunting access in North Dakota, and ultimately preserve the outdoor experiences that define our state. Over the next several hours, we'll explore challenges, celebrate successes, and work towards those very important collaborative solutions. We're very grateful for your presence, your input, and your questions that many of you have already submitted ahead of this conference, and your passion for North Dakota's outdoors. Thank you for being part of this conversation and for your ongoing commitment to these very important topics. Before our presentations begin, it's my distinct honor to introduce the 34th Governor of the great state of North Dakota, Kelly Armstrong. As a lifelong outdoorsman, Governor Armstrong shares your passion. He has been a strong advocate for our hunting heritage in both the state legislature and United States Congress, and now Governor of North Dakota. Please join me in welcoming Governor Kelly Armstrong.
They told me 5 minutes, but I've got until 5:45 on the calendar, so I'm going to riff a little bit. Before I got up here, I checked my pictures, and I shot my deer with my muzzleloader on December 1st. It's December 17th, and I can pretty much guarantee you this is the longest I've gone in my adult life without hunting. We've been a little busy. Until recently, I had 2 jobs, trying to figure out getting back and forth to DC and doing all of that. But I was thinking, and I was trying to figure out when the last time from the opening of pheasant season till the close of pheasant season that I've gone longer than 2 weeks without a shotgun, a bow, rifle, or a muzzleloader in my hand. And I'm fairly certain this is the longest it's ever been. I'm shaking a little bit. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that this is the single biggest thing that I personally love about North Dakota. I don't fish much. I walleye fish when my dad catches a lot, and then I go. I let them scout them. But I have spent my entire life chasing anything that runs, flies around with a bow or a gun or a shotgun. I have done all of it, from public land hunting and knocking on doors to taking kids from Beulah Hazen hunting during the youth season because they had EHD and my kids had outgrown youth season. I've hunted all over the world, and the single best day I have ever had hunting is when my daughter shot her first white-tailed doe sitting in a blind after she completely airmailed it on the first shot and like 80 yards, completely airmailed it, and was calm, cool, collected, and figured out how to recycle, do all of that, and then she didn't miss the second time. And I think as I've done this, I should back up a little bit. I also ran the world's least lucrative elk guiding service when we used to ranch north of Medora, and people I hadn't talked to in 10 years drew an elk tag. And then all of a sudden we were best friends again, which was great. That was where I'm not as mad at anything as I used to be. I just would rather see a good dog work, have an opportunity to hang out with some of my non-political friends, take a kid, figure out a way to do it. And I think we live in the absolute wildlife mecca of the country. I don't know if we're the best at anything, but we sure as hell are the best at everything. We have as good a walleye fisheries as you can have. We have as much access to fishing as you can have. Pheasants, grouse, partridge, which were way up this year. Really frustrated I didn't have a pointing dog. And ducks, dark geese, light geese, mule deer, whitetail, pronghorn are coming back, coyotes, mountain lions, elk, moose. You can do all of the big game, small game, upland, waterfall, but not enough people do it. And we're at a higher rate of average. We do 25% of North Dakotans fish, 18% hunt. Compare that nationally to like 6% of people participate in hunting. We need to get those numbers better, and we need to figure out how to do it. And it's not all paint by numbers. It's not all, we're blessed in that we don't run into a lot of the problems in a lot of the different issues that come with having 80% of your state owned by the federal government, which is what a lot of our friends in Utah, Idaho, Montana, to varying degrees, but it does starve off access, which means we have to figure out a way as a government, as sportsmen, and as people who really truly care about passing this heritage on to the next generation, how we work with landowners, how we figure out how to increase more access. I can tell you one way is if you want to go hunting, don't show up with 13 people without having a previous relationship. But we work really, really, really hard in our family to get as many kids as much access to doing this. And I see Todd Porter's here. I spoke for Pheasants Forever, and I've worked with a lot of the national groups, both in North Dakota and in DC. And we concentrate a lot on habitat, and we should. New farming practices, better, inputs are higher, prices are lower. Every single farmer, every single rancher has to absolutely maximize every tool they have in order to keep doing what we do, which is feed and fuel the world. And we want all of that to work. But as the economies of scale of farming get bigger, and nobody, I see Ryan, nobody's making a living farming a quarter anymore. Nobody's making a living farming 3/4 anymore. So as sportsmen, we have to make sure that our worst day is what the landowner remembers. And as landowners who care about North Dakota, care about the heritage, we have to figure out a way in which we can where we don't hunker down 3.5 sections because we saw one really, really nice whitetail. And as a government, we have to figure out a way to incentivize and facilitate those relationships. And that's hard. That's hard for government to do. Government doesn't do creative things well. And usually when we do, we screw it up, and then we got to go try and fix it. But we don't have acres and acres and acres and acres and acres of federal dirt. We don't have acres and acres and acres and acres of state dirt. So what we have to figure out is how we connect private landowners, farmers and ranchers with responsible sportsmen who want to not only preserve this heritage, and it can be, right now it can be ducks on the Missouri River, it can be pheasants down by Regent, it can be somebody still being crazy enough to chase a mule deer around the Badlands with a bow and arrow when it's 20 degrees below zero. It can be all of that, But we also have to figure out how we create that relationship and how we give more landowners good experiences with hunters, and how we teach more people that shooting your limit isn't the most important thing about being out on any given day. And I'm really, really excited that you're doing this, because this solves, it might not solve anything tonight, but it starts a real conversation that has to happen. Because each and every one of us is here because we care about the outdoors and the tradition and the history that brings. But for me, as somebody who's for the last 6 years spent 2/3 of my time away from my family, what outdoors means to me is going to shoot a rooster with my dad and having my son with, and picking my dog up who lives with my grandma and being able to do that. Every single election day, I go pheasant hunting with my father. And you know why? Because no matter what happens when the polls close, you can't have a bad day if you started the day hunting with your dad. You cannot do it. It's impossible. No matter what else happens the rest of the day, you can't have a bad day. Now, what does it mean to North Dakota? What does it mean to Governor? What does it mean to me? It means I can convince you that I can guarantee you that if there is a 17-year-old kid in any high school in North Dakota that loves to hunt and fish, the chances of that 17-year-old kid still living in North Dakota when he's 30 go up a lot. Or moving home when he's 30. It goes up a lot. So we have workforce issues, we have community issues, we have all of the different challenges we face, which are better challenges than we faced when I graduated from high school and there were no jobs, no opportunities. Was cattle business very good in 1995? Commodities? We haven't figured out the Bakken yet. None of this had really worked in Western North Dakota, and so we were losing what I think is our most valuable resource, which was every single high school senior who graduated. Now we have the opportunity, each and every one of those kids who graduates from high school in North Dakota has an opportunity to call North Dakota home. They can build a life, build a career, build a family here. We can do all of that. But if we can continue to figure out how to get more people, particularly the next generation, into hunting, into fishing, into the outdoors, and figure out how to capture that. One, it'll get them off their damn phones, which isn't terrible. I have 2 teenagers, I promise you, it's not terrible. 2, it'll teach them a little respect for some of the things that the people who have to work that land and make a living off that land every single day go through. And 3, instead of seeing your kids and your grandkids at Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, you might just get lucky enough to have them live right down the street. And if we can figure out that, then we've done something good. And I don't have all the answers to this question. I just hope we're asking the right questions and having real conversations and meaningful conversations about how we get more North Dakotans engaged in this process without forcing anything down on private property owners, because that'll never work, nor should it. We have to find conservative solutions to creating these relationships. And by the way, we can do it and we can try and facilitate that, but at the end of the day, it comes to a guy knocking on a door that's willing to take the risk and ask somebody. And it comes down to the guy opening the door saying, hey, you know what? This guy and his kid are out here and she's never been pheasant hunting before. And not only am I going to say yes, but I might just show them where I know 3 or 4 roosters hang out in the ditch. They got a lab, I'm sure it'll write, you figured it out. And then also, I think as hunters and sportsmen, sometimes we're our own worst enemy, and we have to quit chasing inches. I look back at pictures and I think of stories. I've shot some nice deer. I've shot some deer I shouldn't have shot. I've been out, I've made all the mistakes you can possibly, all experiences, right? When I talk to my son about hunting, and he's like, you sure seem to know it all. And I'm like, yeah, because I've screwed this all up before. Like, all experiences is trying to teach you not to make the same mistakes I've made 1,000 times. But we have to recognize that this is bigger than whether or not you get your limited ducks, or your limited geese, or your limited grouse, or your limited partridge, or you get your deer, or you shot the bigger deer, or you accidentally shot the smaller deer because you got a little too excited. All of those things happen. Those are the great things. But it's bigger than that, because if we don't pass this on to my kid and my son and his kids after that. My favorite part about my deer camp, and I'm going to end with this, because I think this is really the part that is as important. So I go out to deer camp every year, and my dad sits at the end of the table, and he beats me in gin. And he does beat me in gin, particularly this year. And his friends that he hunted with all the way from high school are there. And then I've got a kid who I used to take hunting 3 days a week all through high school. And then my best friend's son is there, and then my son is there. So in how we have figured out how to do all of this is not only do we have my dad, me, and my son, but we have brought other people into our hunting camp at different ages, moving through and watching when your son's 14 years old, he doesn't listen to anything you say. Doesn't matter if you're a member of Congress or recently elected governor, you're still dumb. Because when you're 14, when I was 14, I thought my dad was dumb too. I was wrong, my son is wrong, he'll learn later. But watching this kid, I used to take hunting every day in high school because his dad didn't really hunt. Teaching my kid how to hunt because my kid doesn't want to listen to me is what it's all about. And it's problem solving, and it's game theory, and it's not just paint by numbers, and it's not just if you do this way and this that way and that way. That's not how you are successful when you do this stuff. So they learn so many different life lessons, bigger than gun safety and all of that. They learn to be outside, enjoy the things that we appreciate and we love as North Dakotans. But every single time somebody puts their gun away and says, I'm done hunting because I can't find anywhere to shoot a rooster, or every time somebody puts their gun away because they can't find somewhere to go to just have an opportunity to shoot a couple ducks, that means the likelihood of their kid hunting is almost zero. And that's really, really, really something that we should work as landowners, as government, as sportsmen. We should do everything we can to make sure that that happens as few at times as possible. And there are ways in which we can do this, and there are ways in which we can have these conversations, and none of it's gonna happen overnight. But we have to remember that if we don't pass this on to the next generation, it will die out. And it's too big a part of the fabric of North Dakota to let that happen. It just is. So my challenge to everybody in the room is always the same. Whenever I'm with a group of sportsmen, I don't care if it's at Safari, SCI, I don't care if it's the Mule Deer Foundation, I don't care if it's Pheasants Forever, find a kid and take them hunting. If it's not your kid, if your kid's got a buddy who's not into it, take them out. They don't even have to carry a gun. Find a kid and take them hunting. Because it's a lot of fun to watch them make the mistakes you made when you were 14 years old. And then you get to make fun of them and pretend like you never made those mistakes. But it really, truly is a part of how we grow this state and grow this heritage moving into the future. And it's really, really important. It's important to the state. It's important to state government. It's important to all of us who do this stuff every day. And it's really, really important to me. Not just as a governor, but as a guy who would rather be, if I could spend the rest of my life on gravel roads, I'd be the happiest human being alive. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. It's right at 5:45, Jeb, and I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your night to be here. This is a really important issue that we have to figure out better solutions for. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Governor Armstrong. The trick is always to get all the people in deer camp to teach your kids what you want them to know, because they learn everything that you don't say at deer camp. All right, so we're gonna move on to the portion of our program where we have some presentations to give you some information about kind of what the status is with habitat and access in North Dakota, and a little bit about what hunting and fishing means to North Dakota. And so I'd like to introduce Dean Bangsund. Did I say that right? Okay. Dean has been working on the hunter and angler expenditure surveys in North Dakota for pretty much all of them that we've done throughout the years. And it's a study we try to do every 5 to 7 years, just to kind of put numbers to what's going on with hunting and fishing. So Dean, take it away.
Well, thank you, Casey. Wow, what a good turnout. I wasn't sure what I would be seeing when I looked at the agenda and it was 5:45. It's like, wow, okay. But it's working, and there's a lot of enthusiasm, and I'm glad that we have the attendance we have. Before we hit the highlights of what Casey was talking about with respect to hunting and fishing expenditures, a little backdrop on how we got to where we're at with this assessment. The first study was done in the early 1980s. I don't know how many of you want to date yourself back to that point in time, but you know, we didn't have the opportunities back then that we've got now. And then what happened? Any bonus points for knowing what happened come about 1987, 1988? CRP. And what happened with CRP? Bird numbers, deer numbers, everything shot through the roof. And what also happened about the same time? State entered into a wet cycle. And so the first efforts for this type of assessment were largely internally used by the Game and Fish. Hey, what can we use these for planning, management? You know, it was an internal set of numbers that they used. Now it's kind of come to represent a gauge or a barometer of how important hunting and fishing is to the state. And it's really more than the numbers, but at least it puts things in perspective, because so much of what you hear out there is about numbers. It's this, it's that, how many people, how much they spend. And so I think it's nice that we have the same set of numbers for hunting and fishing as we have for state parks or tourism or you name your activity. So what we're going to cover today is just the highlights. We're not quite done with the study. We'll have a written report forthcoming here probably towards the end of the year. And so I'm going to cover some of this stuff on a pretty rapid basis. Don't worry about specific numbers in some of these graphs that are made for illustrative purposes. So let's take a quick look. All right, where do we get the data? All right, so did we make this up? Did I sit in the closet someplace and crunch a bunch of numbers? No, this is sportsman's data, okay? This is information that was collected. It was specific to select activities. So we didn't ask a deer hunter what they spent when they pheasant hunted, and we didn't ask someone who was fishing what they spent when they went archery hunting, okay? So it's very specific to a set of activities. We looked at a lot of different spending categories. So we didn't ask somebody, hey, what'd you spend last year? Well, I don't know, I thought it was X. Well, so it's very specific information, and it's very useful and it's very valuable for what we're trying to do here. There's a few things that we don't look at, land, real estate, things like that. So these are tangible items that hunters and anglers are spending, and I think it's important to kind of keep that in perspective. Looking at the survey response, that graph shows what the response rate was across all those different activities. We had 18 different activities, but we had 7,000 folks that took their time to fill this out and send in information. About 2,600 for non-residents and about double that for residents. And so it's important to know that you know, this wasn't, we didn't put 25 people in a room and try to guess what everyone was spending. So here's per person average season spending. This is what we came up with the data that was collected from sportsmen. On the far left of that graph is all your resident deer hunting. Then you have your big game, fur bears, pronghorn. You have your upland and waterfowl, turkey hunting, and then the numbers on the far right are your resident hunting categories. So which group spends the most money? This time around, it was resident waterfowl hunters, and by pretty safe margin. And then, of course, it's big game, and that makes sense. You draw a big game tag, once in a lifetime tag in North Dakota, you're going to spend what you need to spend to have a good quality hunt. And as far as non-resident hunting, archery hunters spend a lot of money in the state. The graph contains both durable and non-durable goods, and maybe I should have mentioned that a little bit more when we did the questionnaire, but the non-durable, that's your gas, your food, your lodging. Those are the things that you spend as you go about your hunting and fishing. The durable, that's your gear and equipment, okay? So we track those kind of separately because it makes sense to track those separately. Because one of them is driven more by how much time you spend and the other is driven more by your passion and your pursuit for the activity that you're participating in. So here's hunter participation. This is for 22 and 23. We know that seasons overlap the calendar year slightly. The pie chart, we could make that pie chart look a little different depending on how we group things, but this is based on the survey categories, the survey groups that we had with the initial start of the study. Largest group in that segmentation was resident deer hunting, followed by resident upland. Now, we split resident upland and resident waterfall into two categories. The study does not do that for non-resident. So when we start talking about comparisons and this group does this group does that, keep in mind that while we try to make these groups as comparable as possible, they're not always a direct comparison. So basically the lion's share of folks are either deer hunting, chasing upland, or waterfall hunting, okay? That accounts for, what, 80% of the folks that are gonna be doing some type of hunting. When we look at the presence of resident versus non-resident, this became an issue. For those of you who were around in the 2000s when we saw the big influx of hunters, this became something that people were more interested in knowing more about. Your vast majority of your non-resident hunters are going to be in the upland and waterfall hunting category. The 184,000 participants, okay, license sales are quite a bit higher than that. What this number is this is the number of people that actually went out and chased something. They got out of their vehicle, they went hunting, they actually took part in the hunting activity itself. 184,000 participants. Now these are not unique individuals because as you guys all are aware, you know, I hunt deer, I hunt, you know, like Governor Armstrong said, pretty much anything that flies, walks, or swims gets chased. But 184,000 participants, so hang on to that number. We'll touch base with it here in a second. So let's combine per person spending with how many folks that we have that are actually out pursuing game. I kept the graph the same, and here now you can see where the dollars start adding up. So we're taking per person spending and we're multiplying it by the number of folks that are in these different groups, and you can see there's really two patterns here. You have deer hunting and upland and waterfall. It's not that these other groups aren't big spenders, there's just not as many folks in those groups, okay? So the big drivers behind the spending, deer, upland, and waterfall, and that's true across both the resident and non-resident categories. So the direct spending in 22 and 23 was $305 million. So what that means is that's dollars that were spent by sportsmen in North Dakota in pursuit of the activity that we surveyed them for, okay? So some individuals are going to spend a lot more than what we have shown, and some will spend less. 55% of that is non-durable. That's your gas, that's your food, that's your lodging. Those are the items that you're spending when you leave home and you go about your business. 45% is durable. Those are your firearms, your clothing, all your gear. And we know that there is a boatload of good gear out there. We all spend a bunch of money on it. Splitting that between residents and non-residents, 75% residents, 25% non-residents. Major hunting categories, total hunter spending. I think we've touched on this a little bit. 55% and 32%, 80-some% is deer and upland. What are the critical habitat needs in the state? It's these two categories, right? So this resonates very strongly with the purpose of why everyone is here tonight. All right, secondary economic effects. I'm not going to spend much time on this. It's not relevant so much to the purpose of what we're discussing, but when someone goes and buys a new shotgun, they put into motion a series of expenditures that flow through the business that they bought the shotgun for. The employee that works there, they spend money. There's this sequence that takes place. We use economic models to trace this, and we look at all the different types of hunting and spending. That very first graphic I showed, those get allocated to different economic sectors. This whole thing is modeled out, and so we have an idea of what this additional economic volume is. So the next slide is going to be hunting and fishing and secondary. And right now, our best estimates, and again, these are preliminary numbers. I don't expect them to change much, but we're at about 1.37, 1.3 billion. That's a pretty sizable industry. You know, I don't like to make comparisons to other industries because of they're not comparing apples to apples per se, but 1.3 billion is a very sizable number. And it's for a small state like North Dakota, it's important. 6,500 jobs, those include people that are selling you goods at Shields. It includes the waitress at the diner that you stopped at when you were out hunting. It includes a wide array of folks and a wide array of businesses. 45 million in state sales tax. I got some comments that says, gosh, if we put that much state tax revenue into the system, maybe we should ask for a bigger budget. Yeah, but you know, you think about your own personal spending. You know, you pay tax on just about everything these days. And so a lot of that gear that you buy and a lot of the food you eat and lodging, it is all taxed. And so there's a tremendous amount of tax revenue that comes from this as well. So that's the big ticket number, 1.3, large number of jobs, large amount of tax revenue. All right, so some additional insights. Back in the 2000s, people wanted to know, it wasn't enough to know how much we were spending, where are you spending it? So rural spending came into the picture. So here we have rural hunters spending in rural areas and urban hunters spending in rural areas. And what do we get? About 40% of that figure of the direct spending is occurring in rural areas. Now that's pretty important. There's a lot of businesses in those small communities that maybe they don't survive without the hunters coming in. And for the rural hunters, they rely on those businesses being open year round. And hunting and fishing helps with that. Hunting especially in a lot of the really rural areas. So it's not just important to the state, but it's important to our rural areas as well. What's spending been doing? The last time we had this study, it was 2017, 2018. So we're not getting clouded by COVID. It's not in there. These are spot estimates. Across the board, fish or hunting expenditures are up. Across the board. The only one that it comes in at a slight negative is firearm non-resident deer licenses, and that is such a small number that it's inconsequential. So 55% increase in non-durable spending, 180% in gear, 78% in when we balance out between those two categories. So someone might say, and I know people think out there, well, what about inflation? Well, inflation, yeah, everything's gone up, but to some extent, no, inflation won't account for these increases. When I ask a waterfowl hunter, what did you spend 5 years ago? And they say, oh, you know, I spent $200 in gas. Okay, so I'll come back and ask them. I spent $500 this year. The price of gas go up that much? No, I'm pulling a trailer now. So, you know, working inflation adjustments into these numbers might shrink those numbers a little bit, but by and large, they're not going to have a large effect. What is driving some of these increases? Average days spent hunting has gone up almost across the board, across all the categories, and resident and non-resident are spending more time afield. Now that can be a positive, or maybe they're spending more time because they're not finding the game they're looking for. You can interpret that different ways. So other factors affecting spending, I think this is just, everybody here knows this. You've got so much product specialization, new technology, purchasing preferences, ATVs used to be the thing, then it's side-by-sides. You know, I mean, it's a whole host of things. And so that's some of what's driving the spending, is some of these macro factors that are at play in hunting and the outdoors in general. Other travel and recreation related spending, I got 2 slides left, Casey, so can we put this in context? Well, Department of Commerce says they got $3.3 billion in direct spending from travel and tourism related activities. I would contend that's heavily weighted towards travel and not as much tourism as people believe. If you know a little bit about the mechanics of how those numbers are derived, you'd understand what I'm saying, but that's not important at this point. Some of the numbers that we just saw are in that Department of Commerce number, okay? So some of the travel that's occurring that we're counting is also in that figure. We did a study a few years ago on state parks. 155 million in direct spending, you know, 295,000 day visits and 135,000 multi-day visits. How many hunter participants did we have? 184,000. So we're going to compare very, very closely with the total number of visitations at all the state parks for a year. And I happen to know the authors of that study pretty well. All right, North Dakota City Parks, another form of outdoor recreation, okay? You have all your youth leagues, you have your adult leagues, you have all your facilities, golf courses, swimming pools, all of that stuff. This study is a little old now, but 10 years old, 225 million. What do we have here with hunting and fishing? We have 3 times that. All right, so I'm gonna wrap this up with some takeaways. The biggest thing here is it's not just the dollars, okay? The dollars are important, people wanna see them, they wanna understand them, but look, hunter spending is tied to habitat and hunting access, okay? You know, I mean, think about it. When you guys spend money, and we all do, you're spending it because you're expecting to go hunting, or you are spending it because you are hunting. And when we look at these spending levels, the thousands of dollars per person for some of these categories, you know, it's reflective of the commitment and the passion that sportsmen have, okay? So as a state, we want to keep these numbers. We need to consider looking at what is exactly being discussed here tonight, which is habitat and hunting access. And so I think this ties in very well with the purpose of why everyone is here tonight. Take away big numbers when we add in fishing. Fishing is also a big deal in North Dakota, as you guys are aware. 380,000 participants. Again, 1.37 billion, and substantial share of that is in rural areas. So it's not just Shields, it's not your ATV dealer. It's spread around the state. And that's what acknowledgements. Chad Parent at the Game and Fish was instrumental in this study. If you ever run into him, tell him thanks. We'll have a final report available towards the end of the year. It'll contain more numbers than anybody wants to look at, but everything we talked about is in there, plus some. And I was part of a 3-person team on this study. Jerry couldn't join us, and Nancy couldn't join us, but we were happy to work on the project, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you, Dean. I think in the essence of time, Dean will be here throughout the break if you want to catch him, but also that final report will probably answer the question you have when that comes out shortly. So we'll start right into Kevin's presentation here. So Kevin Kading is our private land section leader. He's going to give us a habitat and access update.
Thanks, Casey. Want to thank everybody for attending tonight. We have a good crowd here tonight, so thanks for taking time for this. I've got nearly an impossible task. I have to go through about 20 years worth of information about hunting and habitat and hunting access in about 20 minutes. So I'm just going to get right into this here. But just some really quick facts about North Dakota. The one thing I want to kind of point out here, Kelly talked about it earlier too. Governor Armstrong talked about 93% private ownership in our state. One of my counterparts said, the ball's not in our court. We don't have the luxury of having a lot of public land, And so what happens on a private landscape is especially important out there. I'll just touch on habitat to start us off with. When we talk about habitat pressures, we talk about a lot of different things. We talk about that upper left corner there is an example of fragmentation. A lot of, a new road or any kind of impact that fragments habitat that was once intact. Could be an oil well road, could be any kind of development, could be anything out there that fragments that habitat. Some species tolerate that more than others. That upper right is an example of habitat that's invaded with species that we don't want there, such as these trees in this case invading a grassland. The bottom left is, a example of maybe some habitats that's in need of some good management. And then urbanization, development. If you came into Bismarck today, you realize how much Bismarck has grown and expanded and kind of reaching out into the countryside every year. We creep out a little bit more, but probably the biggest thing that we want to talk about that we all see as hunters and as a game and fish department is just grassland loss. It's what we talked about earlier. That's kind of what drives a lot of the wildlife populations is grasslands and wetlands. So again, with wetlands as well, these are two big things that we're looking at that are having an impact out there. I'll put grasslands into kind of two different categories, one of them being CRP. You've heard us talk about CRP for 25 years probably, and for good reason. Dean touched on it, pheasant boom in the 1990s, kind of we saw a jump in pheasant numbers and populations when that CRP hit the landscape. And we peaked about 2007 with about 3.5 million acres of CRP on the landscape. Today we're sitting at about 1.2 million acres of CRP on the landscape. And so the chart here, if you were to kind of look really quick, the tall bars on the left are going to show the number of acres that have expired just in the last 5 years. And the other bar is showing what's been reaccepted or re-enrolled back into the program. So the difference there is a loss. We've lost every year for the last several years, kind of been on that downward trend for several years. North Dakota used to be one of the top 3 states, and I think we were right up there with Texas and South Dakota. North Dakota, we were right up there. Now we're down to number 7. Kind of hard to believe a state like Iowa has more CRP than North Dakota right now. Another one that's really precious to us at North Dakota Game and Fish is our native prairies, our native unbroken, never been cultivated lands, and these are under threat as well. We're seeing more conversion of those native prairie landscapes. Some interesting numbers out of some reports that have been put out recently. 2.6 million acres of native grasslands have been converted up in the prairie regions of the U.S. and Canada, and about 600,000 acres in the northern Great Plains region. And a lot of that's occurring right here, right in our backyard in North Dakota, South Dakota, eastern Montana. So lots of conversion going on. We estimate about 72% of North Dakota's native prairies have been converted. And so again, pretty precious resource out there. This is just I don't know how well it'll pick up in the back of the room, but this map just displays the orange being, or that yellowish orange color being restored grasslands like CRP. The green would be our native, never been broken, never been cultivated native lands, native prairie. And you can kind of see, I'll toggle back and forth. That was 2012, this is 2020. You can just see the amount of grass that's disappeared off the landscape. And so if you got a deer tag in one of these units, or you haven't had a deer tag in one of those units, you can kind of connect the dots pretty quick. That's why. Wetlands, I don't want to dismiss what's happened with our wetlands. This is a little bit dated, but when you look at going back as far as 1984, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service report estimated, at least at that time, we had lost about 60% of our wetlands. Fast forward that same report, 2019, that rate has accelerated across the country as well. And we don't have the numbers exactly broken down for North Dakota and for the region up here, but it's likely that less than a third of our wetlands remain from what's on the landscape. And so huge impact out there. Here's an example of that on the landscape. This is a piece of CRP that was in CRP. When that was in CRP, the wetlands were intact. They were probably restored through that CRP practice. Then it went back under production, and you can see a lot of those wetlands are no longer on the landscape. I want to put this slide in here because it really highlights North Dakota. You heard Governor Armstrong talk about energy and agriculture. They're two big sectors that drive our economy, very much so. But we light up on the map for a lot of other reasons. We're number one in a lot of ag products. We're number one in a lot of energy production, but We're also #1 in grassland birds, a lot of diversity, species richness, and these are really important things. These native grasslands and these prairies are truly national treasures, and I think we should really be proud of that as citizens, as private landowners, and not forget about that, because every time we lose one of these pieces, this map gets a little bit smaller out there. So it's a changing landscape. There's a lot of things that have gone on in the last 20 some odd years, but you heard Governor Armstrong talk about it. You don't farm a quarter anymore, so we're seeing smaller, less farms on the landscape, but we're seeing bigger farms. We've seen a shift from more of the small grains. We used to have 12.5 million acres of wheat in our state. We're down to about 7 million acres of wheat. More shifting towards the row crop side of things. Ownership changes, land's changing hands, people are aging out, aging farmers, demographics are changing out there, so that management on that land might be taking a different direction at some point. I already mentioned bigger farms, bigger equipment, and ag policy. I want to touch on that, but I don't want to get into the weeds here, but some of our ag policy out there is incentivizing some of the wrong things out there. If we're just being blunt, there's probably some actions out there that could be changed at a federal level that would maybe give opportunities for landowners so they don't have to make some of these decisions to maybe break out some marginal land or some things that you probably wouldn't want to be farming otherwise. So it's this changing landscape out there, right? We've got what was once areas of, large intact areas of grassland that are now maybe going under ag production. And again, we're not trying to blame that producer for doing that. We understand the need, markets drive decisions, and we understand that. It's probably our bigger system that's maybe that has a hand in some of those decisions that are being done out there. But the point that I kind of want to make with this habitat segment here is if we want this, and I think we do, maybe Governor Armstrong wants a white-tailed doe, which I'd prefer as well too, but that's fine. But if we want this, we need this. And this is a playbook right out of our former big game biologist, Bill Jensen. He said this a lot, and it kind of stuck with me too, that if we want to have, for that first 3 months of that fawn's life cycle, it's not being spent in a crop field, it's spent on grasslands. The mother that's nursing that fawn is heavily dependent on those wetlands and those grasslands as well too. So that's kind of the bottom line. So I'm going to jump into access. Access is another reason we're here tonight. Certainly one of the top issues. Dean touched on it again when we had that pheasant boom in the 1990s with CRP. There was a lot of increased pressure, commercialization, posting, a lot of pressure, hunting pressure on some of those areas. Sportsmen gathered together like this, in fact, and started talking about what can we do. We want to have access to some of those birds out there, and they looked to the department to find a solution, and really that's where the plots program came from. That was the early beginnings of the plots program. Prior to that, the department did have a private lands program, but we did not have the focus on access as much as we do now. Back then it was focusing on small tracts, maybe putting 20 acres of habitat here and there, some food plots and things like that. And access really wasn't on our mind at that time, but it really quickly changed. I'm going to flash through a couple papers here, but access has been looked at nationwide. It's kind of part of this R3 discussion, recruitment, retention, reactivation. It's an important topic. We've looked at it as an agency. And this question that I have at the top here, I'll ask for a show of hands quick, because this is one of the questions that came right from one of you. Somebody asked me when they registered, ask everybody in the room how many people have quit hunting or hunt less because of access issues. Show of hands. Good number of people are probably affected by that. That's probably why we're here. But again, numerous studies have looked at that, and there isn't really a good solution to it. But when we have that habitat loss as well, it kind of compounds that same effect, because now there's less areas, declining wildlife populations, and people kind of clamoring over the same resource. So it kind of compounds that issue. I want to touch on a few things what we are doing, and this is Game and Fish Department. There's a lot of other good nonprofits in the room here that we'll hear from as well, and they've got information in the back. A lot of good things being done by our partner groups, the nonprofit groups like Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, all the other groups. But we're doing a lot. We're making investments into private lands. We've been fortunate. This last legislative session, we were able to add some funding, spending authority to our private lands program. We were able to increase some staffing, so putting more boots on the ground. It takes a lot of work to put habitat on the ground. It takes a lot of work to work with landowners to develop that habitat, to put up access agreements, to keep all that in place. And so it does take more now than it did in 2007. So things are changing that way, but we're making an effort to increase that. And one of the things that we're working towards, if some of you were in, I'm sure some of you were here in 2007 when we hit 1 million acres in the plots program. That was a big milestone. And if you look at the left side of that graph, that was those years when we were growing the program, when the legislature gave us funding, gave us positions, told us to seek access, to try to get access to some of those high priority areas for pheasant hunting. Mainly that was CRP that we were enrolling into the plots program. So we had a lot of CRP in our program. We grew the program fairly quickly over 10 years. We kind of hovered there for a while, for a couple years, but then if you also remember, things changed with commodity prices. Corn was going up to $8 a bushel. Things were changing out there. People were not as likely to stay in CRP. Some of those people were trying to stay in CRP, but they weren't being accepted back in. Just a lot of things that kind of trickled down that we started losing some of those acres that were fairly easy acres for our program to maintain. And we had to kind of shift gears and redirect some of our efforts towards putting habitat on the ground. Before CRP, the big USDA program, was doing the heavy lifting for us. It was able to put that habitat on the ground. They were making the big hefty rental payments. We were getting access to those acres. So our job was a lot easier then. And now again, shifting towards putting more habitat on the ground just takes that much more money, takes that much more time and manpower. And so we were pretty fortunate this last year. We're creeping back up. Our goal is to try to get back to 1 million acres by 2028. We have a 40,000 acre access goal per year. And with that, we have a 6,000 acre habitat goal. And so we're working towards that. Want to touch on partnerships. We've been doing a lot of work with partners and nonprofits like Pheasants Forever. And I don't mean to just single out Pheasants Forever. They're a great partner, but we have a whole host of other great partners. But we work with them. They bring different opportunities that we might not be able to bring. They can provide incentives, and they can provide things like cost share for grass seed or food plots or things like that that help as a little kicker payment on top of a plots agreement. And so we've worked with all of them, and they do great work, and so that's a good thing that we want to keep doing. We're doing some good things right now with Pheasants Forever up in the northwestern part of the state, and OHF, some different things like that. So great opportunities to incentivize what we're doing out there. We're expanding our private lands footprint. Again, a lot of the work that we've been doing the last 20 years has been focused on access. And we still will. We are still focused a lot on access. A lot of your hunter dollars are going towards that. But we're also reaching out into other things. The last 5 to 10 years, I would say, our agency has really focused its efforts on supporting grassland-based agriculture, the ranching community, because it's pretty simple. If we don't have the rancher out there, we don't have the grass out there. If we don't have the grass, we don't have the birds and the critters. And so the Meadowlark Initiative was something that you might have heard about. It's been around now for 3 or 4 years. It's starting to get some legs underneath it, but that's really that arm of our private lands implementation, working with the ranching side of things out there and trying to keep that grass on the landscape. We've developed some new things that are just now hitting the road that we didn't have a few years ago. One of those is a 30-year conservation agreement for producers to give them another option, another thing to consider when the neighbor comes knocking on the door and says, I'll rent your prairie for $150 an acre and we'll turn it into soybeans. Well, maybe now we have another option for them to consider, another thing to maybe layer on to that. So they have another tool in the toolbox for them for keeping that grass green side up. What can we do in the future? This is the big one, I guess, with a lot of us wondering what all we can do. And like Governor Armstrong said, we're not going to walk out of here today with an answer. We're here to start the conversation. There's a lot of great ideas that we hope to get from this. One of the things that we threw out as a big, kind of an ambitious goal, but 3 million acres. And the 3 million acres comes from, if you looked at my graph earlier that showed what we've lost since 2007. Since 2007. To try to get back to that. How do we get back to that? It may not be in the form of CRP. It may be in the form of partner programs. It might be part of CRP. It might be some USDA programs. It might be the plots program, some of these new habitat things that we're working on. But collectively, we want to try to work towards some of that. Well, that doesn't come cheap. That doesn't come easy. I threw a number out here just to kind of show what that could be, and it's probably more than that. That 150 million, again, an estimate, if we were to try to maintain 3 million acres on the landscape in today's money, it's going to take a big lift. And so another $1 million to the plots program sounds great, but it isn't going to solve the issue. It's part of the solution, but it's not the only solution. For comparison, those other numbers are just to kind of compare. $67 million goes out the door to USDA participants with CRP contracts every year. And that's 1.2 million acres of CRP. Our plots program is about $9 million per year for just the plots payments. That's not including the other things that we do with the program. And then for another example, OHF is statutorily it could be $40 million, but right now it's capped at $15 million per biennium. And so there's opportunities there too. But again, if you combine all three of those, we still probably wouldn't have the funding that it would take to really ramp things up in the way that we're talking about. So what else can we do? We want to develop some new access programs. We can't put it all on the plots program. Plots has been around for a long time. It serves a lot of good things. You know, a lot of landowners are interested in it, but some landowners are looking for something different. The circle, the path sign there, I won't steal John Locke's thunder from Pheasants Forever. He's going to talk about this, I think. But that's a program that Pheasants Forever has partnered with several partners in South Dakota. It's kind of a case study for something that's working where they're bringing some additional funds in on top of the walk-in program that they have down there, and it's working pretty well. We've looked at other states, you know, other surrounding states. You know, a lot of people submitted comments about block management or sign-in or reservation-based systems. We're looking at that stuff. There's certainly opportunities to do that. That bottom picture is an example of maybe we could have some kind of a controlled access program. I can tell you we're looking at all those things, but we're very careful and strategic about how we do it. We don't want to jump into something head first and then find out it's going to come at the cost of the plots program, or maybe somebody, landowner decides that's a better thing and they want to jump out of the plots program. So we got to be careful about how we do it, but there's some good opportunities there. We want to develop some more e-posting features. Again, we hear a lot of comments about e-posting. I'm sure there's a lot of passion for that on one side or the other. But again, there's opportunities there. It's a huge opportunity. We have access to how many landowners that we have their information. A large percent of them are providing information already. We want to improve the way hunters and landowners connect with that. We want to provide another option so when a landowner goes up to enroll and sign up for e-posting, they have more than one option other than to post their land. Maybe they get contacted by a plots biologist. Maybe they have an option to enroll in controlled access. Maybe there's other features out there. We can talk about all those things. We have a lot of opportunity to do that. At the end of the day, I think Governor Armstrong talked about it very well. Like, we have an opportunity here as citizens, as hunters, as landowners, as the government, legislators, to make a difference here, to collectively get together and do collaborative conservation. I know that's kind of a catchy phrase, but really it is. I mean, I've been doing this stuff for about 20 years, and it seems like every time one group takes off this way, another group takes off that way, it would be a lot more efficient if we're sitting down in the room talking together and trying to work things out together in everybody's best interest to put habitat on the landscape. And I want to finish really quick here. I got a few minutes, and I thought this was really timely. I received a letter here just 2 weeks ago from a sophomore high school student in Watford City, and this was for her 10th grade language arts class. She was required to write a letter to an entity or a person, group, company, anybody that they had to identify an issue, and then they had to write to that person, identify who that person is, and that person they feel like would have, or that group would have the power to solve this issue. And she wrote 2 pages here. I'd like to share it with everybody. I won't tell her name just to keep her for privacy, I guess, but the first thing she talks about is, I've seen how drastically our daily lives are affected by the condition of our ecosystems, and it's becoming clear we have to take action soon. The beautiful prairies of North Dakota are disappearing because of decreasing biodiversity and the loss of native plants, animals, and habitats. And then she talks, and she goes on, and she has some really good statements in here, but she talks about, I hope that we can come together as groups, as North Dakotans, to prevent this from happening. So, I mean, I think that was really powerful. It really touched me. I mean, I think it was really timely for this, that we got to be thinking about the next generation, this person that wants to get out and enjoy these natural areas that we all enjoy, to be able to go out and hunt themselves and to enjoy what we have as a resource here in North Dakota. So that's all I have. Casey, I'm going to end it there, but as Casey said, I'll be around after this for questions or if we have anything afterwards. So I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart, Stephanie Tucker.
Just when you think you got it figured out. Yeah, up next we've got Stephanie Tucker. She is our game management resource section leader and our fur bear biologist. So she's going to give us a little update on the status of populations of wildlife across North Dakota.
All right, good evening, everybody. My team and I in the game management section are responsible for statewide population monitoring and making sustainable harvest recommendations based on the data we collect. Our team is made up of 14 biologists for the entire state, and we have a wide range of expertise. And I am by no means an expert on all the game species in North Dakota, all the species, the wildlife that are hunted and trapped, but I do get the pleasure and honor of sharing some of the data the team has collected over the past several decades with you to kind of highlight some of the things that are going on with these species in North Dakota. And tonight I'm going to focus on the 3 most popular game species in our state, and Dean mentioned this really well: pheasants, white-tailed deer, and ducks collectively, although of course most people target mallards in North Dakota. And to give you an idea of exactly how popular these species are, here's the number of hunters or licenses sold last year estimates. So I'm going to briefly introduce you to the habitat needs for each of these species and then share with you some of the data or research findings. And my hope is to illustrate some of the impacts that the habitat loss that Kevin was just talking about are having on these game populations in North Dakota. So let's start with pheasants. It comes as no surprise to anyone in this room that they prefer perennial grasslands above all else. Grasslands are essential for their nesting cover, for protection from predators, and providing forage. And sure, pheasants like their grasslands to be near food and winter cover, we know that, but they're a little less picky about grasslands than a lot of other upland birds. They really only need about 25% of their area to be made up of grasslands, and they'll readily use things like road ditches, weedy fence lines, and small pockets of habitat found in like grassy waterways. And they'll even readily use haylands, particularly like alfalfa, because those habitats attract insects, which are the primary diet of pheasant chicks. One of the keys with grasslands for pheasants, though, is that it needs to be unmowed, because only unmowed grasslands provide protection through the winter and the nesting season. And to illustrate the importance of leaving some of that grass unmowed, we want to share with you this data set. This data is the wings that have been voluntarily submitted to our agency by hunters over the last 50+ years. And you can see there with that number up top, we have a pretty big data set these days. And what happens when those wings come in, we pull out the young of the year birds and we look at the primary wing feathers to see what stage they are in their molting process of their primary wing feathers. Their wing feathers are molted at a very predictable timeline, so we can backdate when they hatched based on where they are in that molting process. So this plot or graph shows the distribution or frequency of hatch dates for pheasants by week. The higher the bar, the more pheasants that were hatched during that week, and as you can see, most pheasant nets in North Dakota hatch between mid-May and mid-June. So keep in mind, though, this is for hatch dates only, and chicks are susceptible to haying until they reach 2 to 4 weeks of age and can make those short flights. But this just kind of highlights the importance. If that nest isn't successful and those chicks don't survive, we're going to lose pheasants. This next data set shows you how pheasants have responded to large bumps in grassland habitat in the landscape. Bars in this chart show the number of acres enrolled in both the soil bank program back in the 60s, shown in green, and the CRP program that came about in the late 80s and the early 90s, shown in yellow. Of course, we all know the primary purpose for these conservation programs was not to grow pheasants, but man, did they grow pheasants. The red line shows the estimated harvest of pheasants overlapped on top of those acres. Estimated harvest is a really good index, giving us an idea of how pheasant population is trending. And we had some good years of pheasant hunting during the soil bank days, But we had some really, really good years of pheasant hunting during the peak of the CRP program. Now, we know that bad weather causes some of the dips in harvest that you're going to see there in that red line, and that good weather can also create some of these nice peaks in harvest despite the loss of grasslands. But grassland habitat is driving this ship when it comes to pheasants. As you're all aware, in most cases, our hunting seasons are designed not to impact the wildlife populations, and with pheasants, that job is made pretty easily because we can differentiate roosters from hens and protect that female segment of the population. So there's hardly ever any adjustments made to our pheasant hunting season. Licenses are unlimited. It's 3-bird daily bag. Season's open for just shy of 3 months. But a couple of years ago, we were in a drought for most of the summer. And this agency had some discussions that we haven't had in decades. Discussions about lowering the daily bag limit for pheasants to try and spread out opportunity more. Okay, so moving on to deer. When you think of good deer habitat, you might think of a place like this that comes to mind. A nice wooded riparian corridor, checking the boxes for good forage, good winter cover, no disturbance. But good deer habitat can also look like this. Deer need dense stands of continuous escape cover for their fawns and a strong forb and deciduous shrub component for food. That preferred habitat can come in the form of grasslands, woodlands, or even wetlands. Yes, deer eat corn and soybeans and other crops, but those crops do not provide year-round protection within that habitat complex. So mentioned by Kevin earlier, in fact, we know research here on the Great Plains, northern Great Plains, that crops generally consist of no more than 40% of a doe's home range. A doe may occupy a landscape dominated by crops, but she's not going to be as successful there. Okay, so it should come no surprise that when we had a lot of grassland on the landscape, we also had a lot of deer. When we had huge amounts of grasslands on the landscape, we were able to provide about 100,000 deer licenses. We're having a harvest of 100,000 deer per year. We're just able to provide that much more hunting opportunity when we have that great of habitat on the landscape. In more recent years, the number has dropped to around 30,000 deer harvested. And I'm sure you all realize that the loss of perennial cover for deer, the loss of those grasslands, woodlands, and wetlands, has not been felt evenly across the state. This map shows the change in deer gun licenses available by unit from the peak of our CRP days in 2007 until today. As deer numbers went down, so too did the available licenses. And there's a lot of units lit up in red, illustrating a 75% or greater decline in deer licenses over that time frame. So not only does the decline in our deer population affect your chance of being successful during the deer season, but it also affects your chance of even getting the opportunity to go deer hunting. Now, I'm not trying to oversimplify things, and there's a lot that goes on to drive changes in deer licenses from one year to the next. Weather, disease, landowner tolerance, pressure from other types of hunting, you name it. But it's worth noting that deer gun licenses are our primary tool used to balance all the biological and social things going on with our deer herd. And if you're wondering about those 2 units in green, this is where chronic wasting disease is endemic in our deer herd. And we're purposely keeping deer licenses high in those units to try and slow the spread of that disease. Okay, so how does this affect your odds of drawing a deer tag? Well, in 2009, these are the 4 Red River Valley units, the ones that are lit up most in red. You'd have an 80% greater chance of drawing a deer tag in 2009 with only 2 points in 2A, and you wouldn't need any points to have those same odds in drawing the other 3 Red River Valley units. This past season looks a little bit different. To have those same odds of drawing a deer tag, you need 4 points or more in any one of those given units. Okay, we're moving on to ducks. Again, got time here and a lot of things I want to cover. So, yes, ducks need wetlands, and we should be doing everything we can to protect our wetlands out there. And not just the big wetlands. One 10-acre wetland, as far as the ducks are concerned, one 10-acre wetland is not the same as 10 one-acre wetlands. Small wetlands are important for territories, but ducks also need grasslands. Our most abundant species of ducks, like mallards, pintails, and teal, all nest in grasslands. And without it, they won't come here, or they won't stay here, or they won't be successful here. Okay, and to illustrate how good grasslands and wetlands can positively impact our ducks, let's look at our fall flight index. This population index combines information from both our May breeding duck survey and our August duck brood survey, and our data goes back to the mid-60s. Back then, we were in a drier weather pattern like Dean mentioned, and many small wetlands were dry and maybe subsequently getting farmed, and we didn't have any large-scale conservation programs around. Along comes the CRP program in the early 90s, and at the same time, the skies opened up, pushing us into that wet cycle. And man, it was good for ducks for nearly 20 years. But now we're finding ourselves in another era. We're still in that wet cycle, but grasslands, that nesting cover is disappearing. So you may have heard one of our biologists, Mike, say that good water conditions are masking a habitat problem. And what we mean by that is that lots of water attracts more duck pairs, and creates short-term bumps in available nesting habitat because there's areas that farmers might farm but that they can't because it's too wet. So today we're going to have more ducks in 1980 because it's wetter, but we're not going to have as many ducks as 2003 because there's not as much nesting habitat. And the implications of fewer ducks being produced here in North Dakota has implications throughout the entire flyway because these are migratory birds. North Dakota makes up only about 5% of the central flyway landscape, but in any given year, we produce 14% or more of the fall flight index. We are the duck factory. And to illustrate the impact that fewer ducks could potentially have on our hunting opportunity, here's another data graph. Our May breeding duck survey data are the black dots on this graph, and we're showing them from the mid-90s till today. The dark green line in the background is the number of acres of CRP enrolled during that same time frame. And when we had lots of grasslands, we had a lot of years where the number of breeding ducks was around that dashed green line, or about 4 million ducks. As those acres have declined, so too has the likelihood of us seeing those high duck numbers. And this red line here at the bottom, marking if or when that survey index drops to 2.5 million ducks, is when a restrictive duck hunting package would be triggered. Again, migratory birds, we manage them in conjunction with all the other states in our flyway and provinces and the federal government. That would mean our duck season would drop to only 39 hunting days and a daily bag limit of 3 ducks. So it probably goes without saying that our biologists are concerned that with less habitat on the landscape, that 1 or 2 dry years could push us down to that red line. Okay, and I'd be remiss as your fur bearer biologist if I didn't talk just for a few minutes about predators. I'm talking about those critters that depredate the nests, that eat the chicks and eat the fawns. Things like coyotes, foxes, and badgers. But what we do know is when it comes to predation of pheasants, deer, and ducks, habitat does make all the difference. Here's an aerial picture of Kidder County. I'm showing you Kidder County because a few years ago we did a research project on deer in Kidder County where we marked and followed fawns around. As you can see, there's some haylands and crops in Kidder counties, but there's also quite a bit of grasslands and wetlands. Good perennial cover for nests, birds, and deer. In fact, there was enough of that cover that despite there being plenty of coyotes roaming around Kidder County, those coyotes and other predators just didn't have a significant impact on the deer. There was just more concealment habitat than the predators could travel, allowing for greater production. Of the fawns we marked, 69% of them survived on this landscape, and of the 31% that died, only 25% of those mortalities were caused by coyotes or other predators. We went ahead and did a similar study in Walsh County, and as you can see, it's a much different landscape, much less perennial cover available in Walsh County. A landscape primarily dominated by crops with some tree rows. Well, coyotes are habitat generalists, so they didn't really care that this habitat looked different. They're still over there. In fact, this landscape makes their lives easier because it's easier to find a fawn hiding in one of those tree rows than it would be in a quarter section of grasslands. And that's exactly what we saw with our research. Fawn survival had dropped to 49% in Walsh County, and of those that died, nearly half the mortalities were caused by coyotes or other predators. Just much more efficient predation. So the take home here is that abundant habitat, coyotes and other predators are not as big of an issue. The best bang for our buck is to improve these habitat conditions, not try to remove a coyote just so another coyote can come back in there. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention a couple other major factors impacting game populations in North Dakota, namely weather and disease. We know we're going to have bad winters and cold, wet springs. We know we're going to have flare-ups of EHD and that CWD is here to stay. But we also know that habitat builds resiliency. For example, let's take one more look at that CRP and deer harvest graph. As you can see here, the dips in the deer population due to severe winters like in 1997 or maybe 2010 and 11. But the difference between those two bad winters was how quickly that deer population was able to recover when there was abundant habitat on the landscape. Population shot back up after 1997 because of that abundant habitat, but it hasn't done the same after the 2010 and 11 winter. Lastly, I just want to refer back to the harvest management side of things, which my team and I get involved in. Now, we know from history that when there was an abundance of habitat, we didn't hear bickering about tag allocations. We didn't hear maybe as much about non-resident versus resident. And we didn't hear a lot of calls for ineffective management tools such as bounties. Habitat is the solution, and we can either settle into this new normal or do something differently and try and change some of these population trajectories. But like Kevin mentioned, with 93% plus of the landscape being in private ownership, the ball is not in our court.
All right, I think we'll get started here. I'm going to quickly introduce the panelists, and we'll get right into questions. So the questions that we have are questions that many of you submitted when you registered. And in a lot of cases, there was multiple questions that had the same question, and so we kind of maybe paraphrase those together if they were a little different, but that's kind of how we're going to run with the panelists, and we'll see how we do on time. So our first panel is really to discuss what are we doing now to maintain and improve habitat and access. So we have Bill Haas with the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. He's the Assistant Chief. We have Bo Peterson, USDA FSA Conservation Programs Manager. Close enough. We have Keith Trigo, the Executive Director at the North Dakota Natural and Resources Trust. And then we have Chad Nace, who is a longtime plots cooperator and a rancher, actively ranching down in Bowman County. Okay, you guys ready? All right. So the first question, because I'm his supervisor, is going to go to Bill Haas. He can be the first one out of the gate. But a lot of folks asked, and we heard some from Kevin, but what is North Dakota Game and Fish Department doing to increase access?
Yeah.
Only 5 minutes.
25 minutes? Right, that's why we're all here, or a big part of it, along with the habitat, no doubt about it. And Kevin did a great job of giving us a brief description of what we're doing with our plots program. It's something that's a major priority for our department. We've been increasing the funding towards our plots program and also our acres enrolled, and really focusing on increasing the amount of habitat improvements that we're doing with our plots program. But to do all that, and we want to get over 1 million acres and then some, it costs a lot of money. Habitat development and access is very expensive. We pay by the habitat type. So in the eastern part of the state, we pay rental rates when we're establishing grass. We're paying over $100 an acre versus cropland is $1. So to get that high-end, high-quality habitat, it costs a lot of money. And as many of you know, we're a special fund agency. We're funded by sportsmen, so we're entirely funded by hunting and fishing dollars, and Pittman-Robinson, Dingell-Johnson money, so that excise tax on hunting and fishing equipment. So that's how we pay for plots. And so when we look at that, if we do have these goals of increasing to 1 million acres and also the habitat, we're going to have that conversation about potentially increasing our hunting and fishing licenses in the future in order to fund that. So that'll be conversations that'll have to happen in the future if we want to achieve these goals. But there is a lot of interest in plots. A lot of landowners have reached out to us in the last month or so. This summit, I think, has brought a lot of awareness to the need for for more habitat and access. We've had well over 100,000 acres of interest. Now we don't know how many are going to reach out and sign a contract. It often depends on how much the payment is for them to make a decision if it's right for their operation. The other factor that comes into consideration is for some people, having that land open all year round for hunting access is just not for them. And Kevin kind of hit on this briefly, but we're looking into the controlled access. As kind of think of like block management in Montana. So we met with the Montana Game and Fish folks. We met with Wyoming, South Dakota, other states. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. A lot of these states are doing a lot of other private lands programs. And we talked to all them, what's working for them, what's not working for them, what are mistakes they've made, what are some different programs they wish they could develop. Truth is, our plots program is great. It's outstanding, and it works really well for us. We still have a lot of landowner interests, but we're looking into that, and we do see there might be some niches where plots doesn't fit the mold. It might be waterfall access for field hunting, maybe in the Badlands. You know, we don't have as many plots contracts in that area, or possibly around cities, where if we did enroll that land, it would just get overrun. So we're looking into that, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure we don't undermine our plots program, like Kevin had mentioned, and end up losing access in the end. Another platform is e-posting, and that was put into law a couple sessions ago. It was a compromise. It has some pros, it has some cons. Some of the pros are that 58% of the people that post their land provide their contact information. They don't need to, that's voluntary. And that's really great, especially with cell phones these days. It's tough to get a hold of people. And having that extra contact information is a huge benefit. One of the downfalls is that, you know, when you go on that platform, you have one choice. It's to post that land, it's to post it for the entire season. Now you could go back in and unpost it, but that doesn't happen. So we're exploring other options. Maybe can we have other options for those landowners when they go in, to maybe just post it for gun deer season or the month of November, maybe just through October. We'll give them options, give these landowner options to maybe potentially post their land, but not for the entire season. And as Kevin also mentioned, you know, look into providing habitat or plots offers to some of these folks if they're interested in that. Another platform that we're looking at is Hunter Landowner Network. It's kind of what like the governor's talking about. We have to develop those good landowner-hunter relationships. And this is just a tool. If a landowner has problems, say with antlerless deer, and would like to have some hunters out there, that he could put it on our website. When he has enough hunters reach out to him and they can develop that relationship, they go from there. It's not something where we're paying money to the landowner, it's just a connection. And that's something that's in the works. It's not on our website yet, but we're looking to do that. And then the last thing that I mentioned quick, Casey, is our land acquisition program. We have a lot of landowners reaching out to us that want to sell land to the department. They have a desire to keep their land in conservation. They want a legacy for their family, but our budget is only $800,000 for a biennium, a 2-year period. So you can imagine that doesn't go very far with buying land these days. We're very, very, very selective of which properties that we pursue for land acquisition.
All right, thanks, Bill. So another one that we heard a lot about in the comments and questions was, you know, CRP, we need more CRP, or what the heck's going on with CRP? So that's why we said, Bo, we need you. So the question we have is, we heard, you know, in Kevin's presentation that we've gone from the just over 3 million acres to 1.2 million acres. And so can you explain the changes that have happened in the CRP program and maybe why we're sitting at where we're at?
You bet. So CRP was real good coming into 2008, 2009. Actually, when I wasn't hunting at that same, so fell in love with it, changed my career path, started working with CRP. Since then, it has dropped. Could be pointing at a lot of different things. Comes down to participation, essentially. And why are we losing that participation? And also acceptance into the program. Why is FSA at the national level getting, why are we sending out rejection letters at time of renewal or not taking offers? So those are the two things, participation and acceptance into the program that we're running into. Participation could be a lot of personal reasons, could be the crop markets, maybe it's more financially beneficial to have crops out on the field. One thing our partners do a great job on is marketing how successful CRP can be for the financial or the bottom dollar of an operation. So that is going a long ways maintaining what we have. And then of course, rejection of CRP acres at renewal time or not even taking in the offers. And that's a national budget issue that we're running into, as well as priorities. There's a lot of partners involved with the program. There's a lot of states in this country to spread those dollars around. So nationally, they are taking the better quality. They're trying to get the best bang for the buck. But that's something that, if there's any representatives in the room, I hope you're taking notes. Right now, we're sitting at 27 million acres nationwide, and we're right at it. Nationwide, we're at 26.8 million acres. North Dakota, as you saw earlier in the presentation, we have a little over 1 million. But it wasn't that long ago, just 15 years ago, we had over 3 million acres just in North Dakota. So those are really the two things, participation and then trying to get the best bang for the buck at the national level, which gets allocated down to 50 states.
Thanks, Bo. I'm going to give you a follow-up just because we're on CRP. But
That's fine.
So the CRP Grasslands Program, which is a program that many conservation partners worked on trying to get implemented, along with a lot of input from ranchers. Maybe tell us a little bit about the CRP Grasslands Program and how that works, because it's kind of another little niche, more geared towards the working lands type of thing.
You bet. So CRP Grasslands is one of the newest little caveats or initiatives of CRP. Historically, since 1985 Farm Bill, it's just been cropland getting put into CRP. But in 2016, we started putting pasture land or rangeland into CRP as well. Of course, you're not seeing the $200 an acre rental rates for these lands because they do go off the county average for that specific ag market. So we're seeing that $15, $13 an acre. So not a lot of financial benefit there, but the goal is to protect those rangelands from getting converted. So areas like Bismarck here, a lot of urban expansion, or out in the eastern part of the state where that grassland is a lot flatter, there's a lot of risk of converting that back into row crops or into row crops for the first time. So that's what the grassland program is intended to protect those grasslands, and that's a competitive scoring based on the best quality habitat and the most risk of being converted. Granted, one note for any representatives in the room, those grassland acres count towards our 27 million acre ceiling.
All right, thanks, Bo. All right, Keith, I'm going to move on to you now. Let me give you the zinger. So we received comments stating that with CRP and plots being short-term agreements and not a stable habitat base across North Dakota, can you explain the limitations for land acquisition for NGOs? And I know you know the Game and Fish Department's process too, but just maybe explain some of those limitations, where we sit and why we're there.
So land acquisition is a conservation tool. It's one that's sort of fraught with peril in North Dakota. You may or may not be aware that we have a series of laws and restrictions that exist nowhere else in the United States, which it's sort of ironic. You just heard the governor earlier this evening talk about his passion for the outdoors. That's why you're all here. We wouldn't be here if we didn't all have that passion and concern. North Dakota has a sort of a paradoxical relationship with our outdoor heritage legacy. We put restrictions on who can buy land and the process through which they can buy land. So specifically the question was on NGOs, which would be Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, the Trust, Rocky Mountain Elk, et cetera, et cetera. Most of you are probably members of one or several of those groups. So if any of you here had a piece of land that you thought you would like to sell for conservation, the restrictions in North Dakota are embedded in our corporate farming law, and they date back to the mid-1980s. So the first test is if you, as a conservation group, if you were not incorporated in North Dakota prior to a date certain in 1985, I think it's December 1st, but somewhere in the end of 1985, you are not even eligible to buy land as a nonprofit conservation group in North Dakota. So for example, the Natural Resources Trust is eligible to buy land, Pheasants Forever is not. Ducks Unlimited is eligible to buy land, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation is not. And we could go on down the list. So we make that distinction of who's even eligible. So if you have your piece of land and you would like to sell it for a conservation purpose and leave that legacy, the process that you go through is you work with the nonprofit that you would like to sell your land to. They have to put together a acquisition plan, a background, a fairly lengthy document with pictures, a use plan. That has to be submitted to the Agriculture Commissioner's Office. It's embedded in a process called the Natural Areas Advisory Committee. That committee is made up of several ag groups, several conservation and recreation groups. They hold a public hearing, so you have to take your proposal and be part of a public hearing in your community so that others can make judgment, I guess, on whether or not your acquisition that you're proposing or your sale that you're proposing is acceptable. That Natural Areas Advisory Group then makes a recommendation to the governor of North Dakota. So that would go to Kelly Armstrong, and the governor of North Dakota would decide whether or not you could sell your land to your chosen conservation group. That's how it works in North Dakota. It sounds kind of onerous. It actually can work. We've done many conservation acquisitions, but it's a long, drawn-out process. I mean, I'm not even getting into how you fund it and how long it takes to put all those pieces together. But this is a process that requires approval. So, you know, you would have to be up for that length of time and be willing to submit to, you know, that kind of scrutiny if you actually wanted to sell your land for conservation to an NGO. I will say, and I'll end with this, because I've been working in this profession for a long time, conservation acquisition is a tool. It's not something we use a lot. I mean, it's expensive to own land. It's expensive to manage land. In fact, the only two entities where it really makes sense in North Dakota are the Game and Fish Department and the Fish and Wildlife Service. You have to have personnel, you have to have equipment, but it's still a tool that we'd like to use, and we'd like to have it be more flexible. We'd like our citizens to be able to leave a conservation legacy more easily. But it's, as I said, it's embedded in our corporate farming law, and to get that changed or adjusted in any way, you would have to work with your legislators, and there are some here, but that's the process we have in place right now.
All right, thank you, Keith. And Bill, you had touched a little bit on the North Dakota Game and Fish. There's a process. However, our land acquisition is capped at $800,000 a biennium at this point, and so it just comes down to finding those right places with the most bang for the buck when we get into some acquisitions. But all right, Chad, I'm not going to leave you out. So questions that came in were, in your opinion, have landowner-sportsman relationships deteriorated, and what can we do to improve those relationships as a landowner rancher out there?
Yes.
Don't say no for the second part.
A few years ago, my wife got me a shirt that said, "Cows make me happy, humans make my head hurt." I'm not going to tell you anything that you haven't heard already tonight, but I'll put my spin on it. When it comes to relationships, I think a lot of us landowners, that's what we're looking for. When you look at Southwest North Dakota, where I'm from, there's getting to be less producers, less landowners that are currently out there. And so there's more control of land under less people. So there's less access, and but to get access, it's the relationships. If you drive into my yard with a mossy oak edition of a half-ton pickup with customized license plate, with your back of your pickup more than half full of gear and guns and coolers and whatever else, and you step out of the pickup and look like Cabela's store just vomited on you, and the first question you ask is, where can I hunt? It won't be at my place. If you contact me outside of hunting season, show up at my door with a bottle of whiskey, I might even invite you in for supper. Right, Roger? We as landowners, I guess the way I operate, wildlife are very important to me because it's a gauge to my management. So my cattle can't leave the operation because there's fences. The wildlife can move. So if I can use those wildlife to monitor what I'm doing on my operation, then I can determine whether I'm helping the environment or not. If it's good for the wildlife, it's also good for my animals. So myself and my family spend a lot of time, watching the wildlife. 2021, there's a lot of deer and antelope that came into the yard for water. So a lot of us take that part pretty serious. So we can open our gates to anybody, but we're looking for partners. We're looking for people that are willing to understand what we're doing. And also, we need hunters. We need you to be able to manage our wildlife. So I guess those are kind of the main things I think I've seen. But with the communication, the partnerships, technology is good. But when you look at electronic posting, you look at Onyx, you look at a few things like that, it's taken away some of that relationship. It's easy to pull up an app and look, well, I can't go there, let's go over here. But it's building those relationships. It's understanding the value of what we're doing. I love hunting. My kids love hunting. But it's part of the family. I mean, not only the hunting is, but the wildlife are. And if you come hunt on my place, if we can build that relationship, I can tell you, I can give you advice on how to hunt this or where to look for the birds or things like that. I mean, we pride ourselves too on the care we give to the wildlife. So that's the thing that I look at, and it doesn't matter if it's just hunting or if it's neighbors, whatever. It's building those relationships, building that trust so that we both get a value out of what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Chad. So maybe Chad, since I got you warmed up, we'll just go in. So you've been, I can't remember how long you've been in the plots program. It's been quite a while now. But what has your experience been in our plots program?
Positives or negatives?
All of them.
All of them? The biggest positive, the reason I've got land and plots is that is the ability for us, myself as a producer, to work with a number of organizations, Game and Fish, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, NGOs, to be able to help me to implement practices or infrastructure to be able to increase my management on that land, not only for the cattle, but for the wildlife. So, you know, I always get about getting a jacket with all the emblems of all the different organizations that I work with, you know. Then I'd have, you know, be like NASCAR driver. But it's to have those relationships again, that they value what we're doing. You know, how many times was it mentioned tonight? A loss of grasslands. So being an operator of grasslands, it's my responsibility to do the best job I can. And it sure makes it a lot easier when I have partners to do that. So that's one of the benefits of it, because the biggest focus is soil health. And same way with CRP. We have a lot of out-of-state hunters that come into our area, coming up 85, especially Colorado. And they start hunting plots, mostly CRP in that area, and they can't find any birds. And they'll drive through our yard. We got a blacktop road that runs right through our yard. And they'll drive right down the road and the birds will be flying out. And they'll pull in. And they're like, can we hunt? Yeah. As long as you take my teenager out so he can tell you stories and outshoot you, and you know, but it's the experience. We want people to have the experience. So with the plots, it's the same way. We want, even though it's open access, we want to have that relationship. And I guess a couple of the negatives. Oh, so like the CRP part. To be able to also, that plots land, to be able to, you know, continue the management on it, to increase the wildlife. But one of the negatives, I think, for plots is that you don't know who's going to be out there. Casey can testify to this. This is the first year that someone has not dressed an antelope or a deer right in the gate going into the plots, which is an issue when you're trying to move cattle through there. They don't like that very much, but no, it's I think any of this land though, with plots, it's the management of the land. There has to be management with the plots to have the beneficial wildlife. So and there again, partnerships.
All right, thanks, Chad. Well, I think I'm going to cut it to one more question. I'm going to give it to you, Keith. So the North Dakota Natural Resources Trust collaborates with many different nonprofit groups and government entities. What is needed at the federal level to support more habitat development? Or what can hunters do?
Well, at the federal level is extremely important for wildlife management and conservation in any state. And you know, we've talked about CRP. You've seen the numbers. You've seen what that meant. I mean, we work with the North American Wetland Conservation Act, which brings a lot of dollars into the state. A lot of it goes to private landowners. There's pending federal legislation, Recovering America's Wildlife Act, National Grassland Act, that could use more public support. They're all geared towards bringing more dollars to game and fish agencies to do management, to put habitat on the ground, to recognize grasslands, to reward and work with people like Chad. They're all really important, and there's lots of other players. The Farm Bill is, when you look at the dollars in the Farm Bill and you look at the landscape impacts and the public policy impacts, I say this all the time, I mean, you can add all the other stuff together and it doesn't even come close to what the Farm Bill impact has with CRP and EQIP and all the other pieces. So if you want to put any emphasis and give any support to additional habitat, getting more acres of CRP, keeping rental rates up where they should be, having more options, making it more and more working lands friendly, which it already is, but those are the kind of things that make the difference. We used to have national priority areas that gave us extra points in North Dakota. We've lost those. There's a whole variety of things. It's way too much detail to go into, but we're not as competitive as we used to be. But that would be the thing I would highlight, along with all these other new funding sources that would significantly help state fish and wildlife agencies.
All right, thanks, Keith. I probably got one more question that I can run here. So Bill, this one came in a couple different ways, but why aren't other state-owned lands managed for habitat and public uses in North Dakota?
Why aren't they?
Why aren't they?
Okay. So, for the Game and Fish Department, our mission on our wildlife management areas is clear. We want to manage for production of wildlife and also for hunting. And so if we have a group of folks that reach out to us and they want to put in ATV trails, for example, that's not consistent with our mission. And so we wouldn't be interested in that. And the same could be said for other agencies. So if that same group with ATV riders wants to reach out to the state parks and on their property would like to propose putting ATV trails on, well, that's probably consistent with their mission for recreation. And so imagine a lot of that was generated by the state trust lands, formerly known as the state school lands. There was a lot of comments that we did receive and questions. Just wondering about that state trust lands of, wanting to have that all open for public hunting, wanting it managed for wildlife. And their properties are managed with the goal in mind to raise money for the schools. So that's their mission. And so if they can do other things such as allow public hunting and still achieve their mission, that's something they're going to be interested in. And then also just having reasonable, good quality habitat as well is something, if they can do it and still make money, they'd be up for that. But that's something to keep in mind, I think, is what the mission is of each of those agencies with their properties.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. And I think we'll move on to the next panel. All right, we'll hop right into the next panel here. As they're coming up, I'll kind of introduce them. So we've got with us tonight on this panel, which we'll be discussing what can we do in the future to maintain and improve habitat and access in North Dakota. And so we have Representative Todd Porter with North Dakota House. He's the chairman of the Energy and Natural Resource Committee. We have Representative Dick Anderson. He is the vice chair of the House Energy and Natural Resource Committee. And then we have Tyler Dawkin. He is the chairman of the Outdoor Heritage Fund Board. And then we have John Locks, Pheasants Forever Habitat and Access Coordinator. All right, I'll get my... So Representative Anderson, I'm going to start with you since I like your last name the best. So we heard earlier about habitat loss and what it's doing to our populations. So as a legislator and maybe even as a farmer or farmer yourself, what potential options exist to increase funding for habitat and access through legislation?
I think my mic's on okay. It's kind of tough to find money for habitat, but I do know there's 6 million acres of land in North Dakota that's too salty to really farm, and there's probably 2 million of it that's wet. But I would like to hopefully find a way to grow, like, I know sweet sorghum and hemp, grows well in some of that salty conditions, and that would, as a farmer, it doesn't pay us to farm that land. I mean, if you do get a crop, it's got to rain every week to wash the salt down. So I think there's a huge potential that if we can convert some of those salt acres into some habitat, Another thing that could be done, farmsteads that are still up, that have a lot of trees around them, there is habitat. That's where you see the wildlife. The single shelter belts and that, most of them trees are at the end of their life and they're going to be pulled out of the ground, and I don't think they're going to be replaced. But the farmstead, especially where ranchers have cattle, if you have trees around there, that's where the pheasants and a lot of the deer winter. I know I have a big buck that's, my yard's probably 10 acres, and he sits in the corner of the trees, especially during the deer season, and he's still there. So I think those are two things that we could possibly do. You know, there's 45 million acres of farmland in North Dakota, and 6 million of it is pretty salty, and it just doesn't pay to farm it.
Okay, thanks, Representative Anderson. Representative Porter. So, a common concern that we saw on the comments and questions was the increase in non-resident hunting pressure. How do you think we can best balance resident and non-resident hunters? And we picked this for you because you've dealt with this before a couple times.
And when I first started dealing with this issue, I didn't have a single gray hair on my head. And that was in 1999. And it has been an ongoing point of discussion every legislative session since, trying to find the balance and having the votes in order to change what you may think is the balance. When I became chairman of the Energy Committee in 2007, either 5 or 7, the one thing that I told the leader was, you have to give me a committee that has equal representation of rural and urban, because the only way that we're going to bring legislation out of that committee that is going to be worthy of a discussion on the floor of the House is to have the balance and the debate in the committee on those issues. And it really has worked. And I haven't been in a situation where we have been overthrown on the floor for what I would call a rural issue or a non-resident issue or a resident issue. So having that balance has really worked to give us good, solid policies that move us in the right direction. Now, they may not move fast enough for everyone, and they may not be good enough for everyone. There isn't a single issue that we deal with in that committee that brings more people in and more emotion in than a game and fish type issue. Last session, this silly legislator decided for a constituent he would put in a bill dealing with fishing tournaments. Had no idea that grown men would stand up at a lectern in front of the legislature and cry about a fishing tournament. But it happened. And I'll never put another bill like that in again, ever. But, you know, you get into, you know, you have discussions, and we're surrounded in, you know, waterfowl has been a huge topic of conversation over all of the years that I've been there. We had a bill in called Hunter Pressure Concept that would have kind of ebbed and flowed with the duck numbers and with access, and that didn't pass. But we did some other tweaking back then for the 12,000 non-resident waterfowl hunters. So now we have a lot more than that, pushing in the 30,000 area, and those tweaks that we did probably aren't enough anymore. You know, our waterfowl season is a very short season. It is very dependent on what happens in Canada to start the flow of the waterfowl to the south. It's very dependent on our weather, on whether or not they will even stop. If we've had snow, if we've had cold, and those little ponds are frozen, you can wave to them as they fly over us. So some years we have a really good waterfowl season. Some years we have a really bad waterfowl season. But what we do have around us is restrictive waterfowl seasons from other states and countries that we're the only game in town. And so we have to look at managing some things a little bit better in regards to that. Our upland game, we are also kind of competitive with South Dakota, but you know, the majority of the upland game hunters still tend to go into South Dakota, but we get a fair number of non-resident upland game hunters. And of course, we restrict their access to our plots and our wildlife management areas for our residents only during the first week of the season to give them the opportunity to kind of shoot the dumb ones. And then as we go on in the season, you know, it really comes down to access. You know, the habitat for pheasants changes dramatically based on our winters. North of the interstate can 1 year be really good and the next 5 years be really bad. But the southwest corner is kind of where the mainstay of the pheasant hunters come into, so you see more pressure down there for those birds. When I go to Mott and Regent and hunt, and in the early CRP days, the locals hated the CRP program. They probably still do. They saw it as the death of rural America. All the people that own the land still got a rent check, didn't have to do anything, and they moved to town. And to town was usually Dickinson, Bismarck, Mandan, maybe Rapid City, maybe Billings. And so went their dealerships, so went their grocery stores, so went everything. The only thing they had left to keep the cafe open was the non-resident hunter. So the economy that's built into those issues, especially in rural North Dakota, are real. And the emotions that people bring to the discussion are real. And one person wants less, one person wants more, one person will take them all. But you know, our job is to make sure that there's a balance and to make sure that we are doing the best we can in order to make sure that the experience that everyone has is a good one so that they keep coming back and want to do it more.
Thank you, Representative Porter. So John Locks, maybe we'll give one for you. I feel like you're kind of the oddball up here, almost. But so Kevin touched on it a little bit, but Pheasants Forever has a new program called PATH that was recently kicked off in South Dakota. Can you tell us what PATH is, and do you see this as an option for improving access and habitat in North Dakota?
You bet. So PATH is referring to our Public Access to Habitat initiative. This was modeled largely off of our efforts in Aberdeen, South Dakota, the Aberdeen Pheasant Coalition. This is where a local chapter and local biologist got local business owners, tourism departments, and other conservation groups together to fundraise around public access. So they clearly saw the value in this connection between hunting, public access, and the rural economy. That group raised funds that were then used to incentivize landowners to also enroll in CREP. And in South Dakota, CREP is open to public access through their walk-in area program. So through that particular initiative, they raised $100,000. They secured 4,000 acres of new publicly accessible habitat in close proximity to Aberdeen. So we recognize that not everywhere is Aberdeen. Not every community can support things like that, but this got the wheels turning and kind of evolved into this PATH initiative. And we broadened the scope a little bit. It's not so community focused like the Aberdeen one still has that element, but it's our main mechanism to increase access to private lands and landlocked public lands. To do that, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, and it's all about partnerships. We've talked about that over and over tonight. We can't do it alone either, but we can bring some flexibility to the delivery of habitat and access, and that's kind of what we do with paths. So we have several different strategies to do that, one of which being the incentive-based program, which is what we're kind of referring to with the Aberdeen Pheasant Coalition and the South Dakota Path. That's where a financial incentive, a one-time payment, is used to kind of sweeten the pot, per se, to encourage more enrollment into, say, plots or walk-in area programs, things of that sort. Those one-time incentive payments can be used to target specific habitat types or access in specific geographies. So it's a pretty valuable tool and a one-time investment. It's easy for us to bundle and secure funds through chapters, donors, corporate partners, and even we've chased external grants as well to help fund that. So it's our way to help elevate existing walk-in programs and engage a larger audience around that initiative. So South Dakota Path, that Casey referred to, is now a statewide initiative in South Dakota where we offer a one-time incentive payment. This is often tied to a new CRP enrollment, so we're targeting that early successional habitat, the highest quality habitat we can get, that is enrolled for a 10-year access agreement. So one $25 per acre incentive is typically what we're using for that, is securing access on that acre for 10 years. This can be exported to other areas, and in our pheasant strongholds where CRP is still a valuable tool, or other programs that function like CRP, it's a great tool. We have a similar pilot program in Nebraska called the Nebraska Community Access Partnership. Functions very similarly, but it's being focused in about a 6-county area in western Nebraska. Similar to South Dakota Path, it's a one-time incentive payment that is then securing 5 years of access through the Open Fields and Waters program. So again, it can be tailored to the state. We offer that flexibility, and that incentive-based approach is kind of one approach. We have other tools. You know, we have the ability to put more boots on the ground to help deliver access programs. We can pursue long-term access easements, and we also have, in certain situations, helped increase just overall programmatic funding, bringing dollars to the table up front that can be leveraged with PR and other things to kind of stand those programs up. So your follow-up question, does this have a place in North Dakota? Absolutely. I'm excited, and we have kind of started those discussions with North Dakota Game and Fish to kind of tailor it for North Dakota. And so I'm excited to see where that can go.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's a good way for those hunters or those members of chapters to get involved too in some of that stuff. And so, you know, that was one question we had from a lot of folks, is how do we as hunters get involved? And so, you know, try to pick those things out as we go through some of this stuff. But all right, Tyler, I better ask you one. I don't want to leave you hanging. So Tyler, at the Outdoor Heritage Fund, there's certain folks that qualify to apply for Outdoor Heritage Fund monies, whether that's agencies or nonprofits, I believe, right? And so with the applications that you've received, have you gotten many that include access? And also, how do you feel that the OHF board looks at including access in some of those proposals?
Can you hear me? You know, I'll start out with, we have 4 directives. Directive A talks about access. So if you look back from inception of the OHF, you'd see this fancy bar chart. It'll say 10% of the funds have gone towards access. Sounds really good, looks really good on a chart. When you start digging into the data, I looked at the data here the other day. Since 2020, we've had 16 projects that deal with Objective A access. Well, when you really dig into them, 2 of those really are hunting access. The rest of them are, it might be like a boating access. Hey, they want a boat dock that's called access, some trailhead. So overall, we're really not getting access grant applications. The 2 that we had are really good. One's a public land that the trust is doing, creating some access to some public lands. The other one, I think we mentioned it earlier, was the Mondack Pheasants Forever doing on the plots land, creating habitat and access there. But overall, access is really, really tough in terms of a grant.
How do you, I'm going to follow up maybe, Tyler. So maybe have the discussions in the board, has there been any discussions on trying to, I don't know what I'm looking for, figure out a way to get more of those opportunities in there?
Yeah, so, we have some really good partners. The Trust, Audubon are probably our 2 biggest partners. And they have came a long ways. Every time they do a project, they are talking to the partners or to the people who are doing the land on, hey, your plots program, you guys should talk to Game and Fish. They don't require it, but there's definitely discussions encouraging them to, go into plots programs. As far as discussions on the board, we haven't really had a discussion whether, hey, we need to require you go into plots. Also, another side is just because they do a habitat or any project, it might not fit good for plots either. A 5-acre habitat project on a 4,000-acre land is like Game and Fish, you guys have limited funds too.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. So Representative Porter, I'm going to go back to you. And it came up on our last panel too, actually, with the OHF budget. But it's kind of capped through appropriations, essentially, at the 15 million. The legislation that OHF is under or granted into a system is much higher than that. With the increased need for habitat, what would it take for maybe the North Dakota legislature to get behind increasing the OHF fund to what they're allowed?
So I think, when the bill was originally put in, I think we started out at like 45 million on the cap, and I don't know that it even made it out of the House at 45 million and was down at like, I think that was the original bill, but it got down to 20 million pretty fast. And then we went through a few downturns in the economy. If you remember, oil reaching a negative number in the futures market, those downturns in the economy caused the Appropriations Committee to lower that cap to refocus the money into the other portions of the budget. So now it sits at 15 million. There really hasn't been a movement to push it back up from that 15 million. But I think one of the downsides of that is really the committee, the Outdoor Heritage Fund Committee, not coming to the legislature and saying that they see an increased need for funding and that they see all of these projects that they could be doing with the money. I don't think that the legislature is going to move off of that number without a reason. I think that's the number that's going to be set until there's a reason to move it. One of the things, we talk about access and we talk about the ability to get quality access. One of the programs that I've been pushing for the last 10 years is to have the North Dakota Trust lands manage their lands in a different fashion. Not differently from the standpoint of leasing it out to farmers and ranchers, but the practices that they use inside of it. When we know all the studies that come out of NDSU show that rotational grazing is good for the land, it's good for the wildlife, it's good for the production of cow-calf pairs on that land, better weight gains, better water supplies, and we have equip dollars that could be partnered with Outdoor Heritage Fund dollars and with Game and Fish dollars and cross-fence some of these big sections of land so that the cattle are rotating through and our native grass species are able to survive and do better. Plus, there's going to be something left at the end of the grazing season, maybe to hunt and to have access to. But the North Dakota Lands Department doesn't own the fences on those lands. The person that's renting it does. And you know, they aren't interested in becoming a fence owner in those lands. And so, you know, the model of thinking needs to change, but you know, you're looking at about 3 million acres of public land that's available for a portion of our hunting season and hiking and other seasons that is totally underutilized because it's not being structured to be a better place. And you know, I don't know where to take it and how to do it, but you know, they're not interested in doing it, and the landowners that are leasing it certainly aren't because they only have 5-year leases. So something has to give inside of there if we're ever going to see a change with those types of lands.
All right, thank you, Representative Porter. So, Representative Anderson, I'm going to ask you one. And I'm going to ask you the same question that we got from Chad Nace, and maybe more on what you guys are seeing legislatively, but the fact that the relationships between landowner and sportsman have taken a downturn from in the past. What can both parties do to improve on those relationships in your mind?
Well, I have a few acres of land that have a lot of pheasants on, and usually when somebody comes up and asks me, I let them hunt, and especially kids, because the kids are more grateful than anyone. So anytime you can communicate, even at a community event, you know, there's hunters that come in the cafe in the morning, and a lot of them, they ask you where to hunt, and I try to help them, you know, because I just know that it's good for the cafe, and it's good for the whole town. Todd was talking about too the snow in the southwest. I've raised over 4,000 pheasants, and the difference between Dickinson and where I live, Dickinson has 10 days of 4 or more inches of snow. I have 120 days of 4 or more inches of snow. So I would like to see some of these old farmsteads restored, though, because most people that farm around these old farmsteads leave 30 acres or 30 feet of crop or corn up around these farmsteads. And even when we get rain and there's some snow, you know, the snow crusts, but if you have a farmstead where you got deer, the deer will scratch open the ground and the pheasants would eat. And I'm not sure I answered your question about improving relationships, but I just think when you go into a small town cafe and you visit with people, most of these hunters that are there you're just looking for a place to hunt. And you know, if you have too many roosters, it's not good for the rest of the hens. So I usually let people hunt. We also have a lot of grouse up in our area, and they love to hunt them too. So, but I took a complete stranger this year from Wisconsin hunting for 2 days. I never met the guy and talked to him, and my neighbor was taking a guy from Michigan and was letting him archery hunt, and we asked him to, you know, I'm being a Republican, Shane asked him if they had Trump signs in their yard, and they wouldn't answer the question, but we let him hunt anyway. So.
So thanks, Representative Anderson. Tyler, maybe another one for you, and then we'll probably start to wrap this up, but what role can the Outdoor Heritage Fund play in increasing habitat in North Dakota, and maybe some of the things that you've seen? I mean, I don't know if everybody's even aware of some of the Outdoor Heritage Funds things.
We have funds, bring us proposals is the first thing. See a lot of partners here, whether Ducks Unlimited, National Wildlife Turkey Foundation, Mule Deer. Obviously, we like habitat proposals. If you guys keep bringing to us, we're going to keep approving them. But until you guys bring them to us, we can't approve them, but definitely be active, and the more we see, the better.
All right. I think I'm running up on time here again. But why don't we give these guys a round of applause and a thank you for coming up.
Everybody else go hunting, but I call him and she's like, no, he hasn't called yet.
All right. Well, I think we'll start to wrap this up for the evening so that everybody can get on with their travels. But as Jeb mentioned earlier, a lot of partners and stuff will be around. And Game and Fish employees, if you have other comments, questions, make sure to hit us up. We'll be here for a while. But hopefully you can see that this wasn't going to get solved today. You can see that the quest for habitat and access goes well beyond just an issue that the North Dakota Game and Fish Department is going to be able to fix. It'll take everybody that is interested in North Dakota's wildlife and outdoor heritage to step up and do their part. And one way after this Habitat and Access Summit is, we wanted to put this up. So we are going to be collecting feedback from you folks that were here, got to hear all this information. This is another way to add comments, questions, feedback. You can write down that link on the bottom there, or you can scan that. If you want to try to do it now and stop listening to me, you can scan that and do that. But we'll have this open for a while yet, but to garner some more ideas and other comments about habitat and access and how we might be able to improve and move forward. But as the months continue, I look forward to hearing new ways that the department may be able to improve habitat and access, as well as ways all of you who are interested in the topic are going to move the needle. I would like to point out that there are numerous handouts in the back. We got a lot of, and those handouts were built based on a lot of comments and questions we got, trying to help answer some of those ways we can help. Programs landowners can get in, and all kinds of other stuff over there. So please, on your way out, check out the pamphlets and stuff. And I would thank everyone for coming. It was a good turnout. Hopefully we didn't disappoint, but I know we got a lot of good information as we got comments from people, and we'll get comments going forward. I'll take one question. Good question. So there's actually a recording of this whole thing, and once we get that published, we got to get it from BSC, as they recorded it for us. Once we get that, we'll be able to put that out. Yep, and it'll be all available. Good question. Thanks everybody for attending, and if you got questions, come and find us.